Hello, 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 and welcome back to Behind the Walls of the World Psychiatric Hospitals. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Gallup, and today I have something a little different for you. I'm actually going off script, and what I promised last week was that we would get into the life of New Zealand author Janet Frame. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I became so engrossed in Janet Frame's autobiography this weekend that I didn't have any time to do my recording and my usual writing that I do. And that just speaks to how absolutely delicious her writing is. And so I encourage you, some of you may have seen the posts on Facebook and Instagram about her book. I encourage you to grab a copy because the writing is really stunning and the story is so compelling and moving. And so what I thought I would do today, a little backward. What I should do is I should tell her biography first and then give a little excerpt of her writing, but I'm going to do it backwards. I'm going to give you a little taste of her writing today, and then I'm going to tell her story next week. So just a few heads up before we get into the story. She uses some language that is now considered outdated and ableist. It's very indicative of the time, so just be aware of that and know that that's coming ahead. And then secondly, she also references sort of the central point of the story is the main character's 21st birthday. And she explains in her book that at least at the time that she was writing, I'm not sure if it's still true today, the 21st birthday was the age of majority where they could vote, they could make a will. It was where they became an adult. So this is a very significant birthday for the character in this story. And she does say that the character in the story is based off a true person that she experienced when she was in Seacliff Mental Hospital. The story that I'm going to read is called Gorse is Not People, and it was featured in The New Yorker in 2008, 4 years after Janet Frame's death. When she originally submitted it, she sent it to a poet that she really admired, and he rejected it for publication, saying that it was too painful to print. But in true Janet Frame style, the writing is absolutely lovely and the story is compelling, though painful. So come on in and get comfortable, and we'll have Janet Frame take us behind the walls of Seacliff Mental Hospital. Gorse is Not People by Janet Frame. Do you remember your 21st birthday? The party, the cake, and cutting a slice of it to put under your pillow at night to make you dream of your future beloved? The giant key, the singing, I'm 21 today, 21 today. I've got the key of the door, never been 21 before. Trivial, obvious words. Yet when the party was over and you lay in bed remembering the glinting key and the shamrock taste of the small glass of wine, and perhaps the taste of a sneaked last kiss in the dark, then the song seemed not trivial or obvious, but a poetic statement of a temporal wonder. You had, as they say, attained your majority. You could vote in the elections. You could leave home against your parents' wishes. You could marry in defiance of all opposition. You had crossed a legal border into a free country, and you now walked equipped with a giant tinsel key, a cardboard key covered with 3 penny spangles. Or perhaps your 21st birthday did not happen that way. Perhaps there was no party, no cake, no wine, and no kiss. I would like to tell you about Nada's 21st birthday. Nada was a dwarf, which is not really a rare thing. I suppose in our lifetime we see many dwarves. First, perhaps, at the circus, where they're advertised as the tiniest people in the world, and we pay to watch them moving about in their almost walnut shell or matchbox beds. Sometimes we pass them in the street and stare hard for a moment, then pretend we haven't seen them until they've passed us and we look back saying, it must be strange. How strange it must be, such tiny folk, and us out of reach like tall trees. Now, Dwarves are people in their own right, who move among us and below us, and are usually bright people and kind, living in a place where staircases are mountains and streets are caverns. They are brave to walk, menaced by cliffs of brick and peaks of polished snow. But Nada didn't live in what was called the world. Since her 10th birthday, she had lived in a mental hospital, in the ward where they put people who were strange in shape and ways, where old, frail women were tucked under thin, frayed bedspreads, waiting for the time when their jaws would drop suddenly in the night, where curious, bland children with slit eyes and lips bubbling with saliva played with rag toys or a red wooden engine in a yard that was hidden from the outside world. Sickly yellow grass curled up through the cracks in the concrete, but no geraniums blossomed there. Should not children have geraniums? The dry, sturdy, dusty flowers with the red, stony velvet smell. Nada grew up in that yard until on her 15th birthday, because she was beginning to take too much notice of the male patients and was writing notes to the baker and the pig boy and the farmhands. She was put in yet another ward, where it was said people stayed forever. She was the youngest patient there and the smallest. Everyone felt sorry for her and was kind to her. On Sundays, the minister sometimes let her choose the hymn, "Onward, Christian soldiers, the Lord is my shepherd," or "Shall we gather at the river?" On Mondays, the sister of the ward took her to fetch supplies or through the matron's office for the mail, and every morning at 11 o'clock, Nada went with the nurse to collect the bread. She was also taken up by a group of women who came each month with string bags full of yellowed magazines, the ladies' committee, and who had frightened looks on their faces, for they did not know how to talk to the patients, but leaned forward and whispered to them, as if trying to share guilty secrets and address them as dear, talking as they might have talked to children, which was a sad approach. Sad also for the committee women who were attacked by the self-proclaimed goddess who resented being asked the week of Christmas, "And what would you like Santa Claus to bring you, dear?" Now, although Nada did not really remember much of any other world, she always talked of the day when she would be 21 and free. She knew what happened when you were 21. You were given a key and allowed to do as you pleased. She saw no reason to imagine that this would not happen to her. She believed that she would be in the hospital until she was 21, at which point she could fend for herself, making her own way in the world, perhaps as a film star, a tap dancer, or a ballerina. How she looked forward to her 21st birthday. It was coming closer and closer. She ticked off the days on the calendar, and she sent a request to Uncle Henry of 4KN Radio asking for "I'm 21 Today" to be played over the air on the Friday that was her birthday. And also the song she liked, Nat King Cole to sing, "Too Young to Really Be in Love." For Nada was in love. She was in love with the pig boy. He passed by each day on the carts collecting the pig food, and each day he pushed a note through the window of the day room. He and Nada were going to run away together into the hills. They were going to dance every dance together forever. They would be married and have many children, and Nada at her wedding would have a long white dress and carry orange blossoms, and they would go to Hollywood or to Mexico City, it wasn't decided which, for their honeymoon. The pig boy had arranged everything. The night before Nada's 21st birthday, the ward sister called her into the office. Nada's eyes were glistening with happiness, and her pale face was puckered in a smile that yet contained something of the expression you might see on children who had known death too young or were making daisy chains when the bomb fell. She held under one arm her wax doll, Margella Lucia, which one of the nurses had brought for her and dressed as a bride. In her other hand, she carried a lit cigarette, which she puffed on now and again, then withdrew, smeared with lipstick, from the vermilion cupid's bow of her lips. "I'm 21 tomorrow," she said to her sister. The sister sighed and finished signing her report book. She looked up, frowning. "How often have I told you about cigarette ash? It'll burn the place down." The sister still remembered the fire years before, when she was just a junior nurse in pink, a new nurse carrying coal, emptying ashes, and polishing corridors. The whole ward had burned down then. The women were burned too. You could still see the rotting wood and the rusty iron, the patches of nourished grass, brighter and more rich in color than the small jaundiced blades that struggled up in other places, through the concrete in the trodden park. "I'm 21 tomorrow," Nada said again, impatiently. The sister smiled. "I heard you," she said. "Tomorrow you're going to town to talk to some men. You'll like that, won't you?" "Men?" Nada's eyes glittered. Then she pouted. "What kind of men?" "Doctors, Nada. They want to talk to you." "Why?" "Well, they know you're 21, I suppose." "Is it because I'm going out in the world?" The sister did not answer. Nada suddenly jerked her doll upright, and the long-lashed blue eyes of the wax bride opened with a snapping sound and stared meltingly, coquettishly at the sister. "I know," Nada said. "It's because I'm 21 and going out in the world to be free. I've got my life to live, you know that. I can't stay here forever." The last two sentences were the ones she had heard the heroine of her favorite radio serial, Margella Lucia, speak. "Now we won't talk any more about that," the sister said, "but you'll have a bath tonight, and I'll have clean clothes for you tomorrow. And you'll have a nice ride in the hospital car with Nurse Edgewood. Good night, Nada." By the next morning, the whole ward knew that Nada was going to town for her birthday to see the doctors about being free and making her way in the world because she was 21. It was pretty definite that in a few days' time she would be saying goodbye to the hospital. Nada spread the news breathlessly, even stopping the doctor who was hurrying into the treatment room, and the doctor smiled. "I see. That's good news, Nada," he said. He was only 2 years out of medical school and still believed that patients should be spoken to and smiled at. Dressed in a skirt from the sewing room and a twin set that the matron had brought, and with a red ribbon threaded through her already graying hair, Nada waited for the car. She was not taking her doll with her. "Dolls," she said contemptuously, and laid Margella Lucia on the sofa in the day room, asking Mary, the nun who was praying in the corner nearby, to look after it for her. Then she picked it up, kissed it goodbye, leaving traces of bright lipstick on its face. Allure velvet. She tucked it down on the sofa again, and its beautifully ordered eyes shut in sleep. Then the black government car, spitting and snarling gravel from its wheels, stopped outside, and the driver, a heavy man with a dark blue suit and cuffless trousers, opened the door like a chauffeur. The sister led Nada out of the ward. "Hello, Nada," Nurse Edgewood called from the car. "Happy birthday. This is for you." She held up a small silver brooch in the shape of a key, inset with a milky imitation pearl, the kind Woolworths made, glowing secretly to itself. "I was going to buy a bird brooch, Nada, but you said you wanted a key. I'll change it if you want me to." Nada panicked. "Oh, no, you've got to have a key for your 21st. The nurse said nothing. The sister said nothing either. The staff were forbidden to give presents to patients, but in Nada's case, because Nada had no visitors and no letters and no other home, an exception could be made. The sister gave Nurse Edgewood a folder of papers and shut the car door. Nada was engrossed with the key. "I'd much rather have a key than a bird," she was insisting. Silly old bird. Silly old bird. The car moved forward. Everybody waved and Nada waved and smiled back, not only at the sister, but at the patients who were pressing their faces up against the windows, taking it all in. For not everybody had a chance to go to town. It was only when you needed an X-ray or a head operation. Nada had considered this in a waking moment of fear in the night, for she had dreamed that it was her wedding day, and she had changed out of her wedding dress and into her going-away suit and was waiting, up close to the pig boy, for the plane to take them on their honeymoon, not to Mexico City or even Hollywood, but home, where Nada used to live, in the small square house with its wooden latticed eyebrows, and the straggled lupins in the garden, and the rusty old pump with dirty water pouring out. And in the dream, the doctor saying goodbye to them had given Nada a small box with a half-naked, filmy lady on the outside and what seemed to be chocolates inside. Small silver squares. She unwrapped one of them, and it was her hair tied in silver paper. It was all bits of hair tied in silver paper. She put her hand to her head to feel the perm she had been given for the wedding, but there was no perm there, for her hair was gone. Then the plane came out of the sky, and it was an ambulance to take her to town for a head operation, and the pig boy did nothing about it. He didn't even speak. She pushed him, and he fell over stiffly like a rubber man, bouncing slightly on the ground. He wasn't real. Nothing was real. The going-away suit was a night tie with a number in red chain stitch on the pocket. And then it was afterward, with the nurse, and the nurse was shining a torch in her eyes to see how big the pupils were and writing it down on a chart. Nada started to cry, waking up, and saw the night nurse with her torch walking through the dormitory. So it was all a dream, really. And besides, she would be 21, and no one could deny that being 21 made a difference. The journey to town was to see the doctors about being free, and not because they wanted to come at her quick with a head operation. As soon as the car was clear of the hospital, Nada turned to Nurse Edgewood, who was one of her favorite nurses, and held out her left hand. On the third finger was a ring that sparkled and shone and showed the world sapphire in its mirrors. "It's my engagement ring," Nada said. "From the pig boy. Lofty. I'm seeing the doctors and getting out this weekend. Lofty is getting a special license, for it isn't right for engaged couples to wait. He saved up his canteen money to buy this for me. He hasn't had tobacco or cigarettes for weeks. It's sapphire with one diamond. The diamond makes the most sparkle. Lofty is my true love." The nurse looked at Nada's shrunken body and the curled little hand with the top-heavy bluestone ring burning on the third finger and the silver key brooch that was now pinned to Nada's child-woman breast. "You'll enjoy yourself today," Nurse said. "What would you like to eat in town?" "Sponge cake with 4 layers and a dry martini." Outside in the world, it was not springtime. The hills and paddocks were lit with bursts of gorse flowers, and the heavy drunken perfume came blowing through the open window of the car. "What is it?" Nada asked. "Gorse, the farmer's curse." "Is it always there, yellow like that?" "As far as I know, has no definite season, no birthday, so to speak." Nada was delighted. "No birthday," she repeated, fingering the brooch on her breast. "It's out in the paddocks there without a birthday." She leaned out the window and stared at the happy chicken-like ruffles of color. The day was warm and sunny, yet with a thin cotton twist of clouds sewing together the blue gaps of sky, and a quick wind gulping on its own breath in the sweetness of the gorse. Nada looked around her suddenly at the cruel, caging, black body of the car. "I want out," she said, pointing to the hills. "There. I want out there without a birthday. Silly old car." The nurse caught her wrist. "Don't, Nada," she said. "You'll spoil everything. And remember, it's your birthday. You can't go out there in all that gorse." Nada grew calm. "Yes," she said. "It's my birthday and I'm 21. She unsnipped the key brooch and clasped it in both hands. "I've got the key of the door." Yes, they had sponge cake, only it was 3 layers, not 4. The top chocolate, the second plain cream, the third raspberry. They drank not dry martinis, but milkshakes, whipped white and red out of tall silver canisters. Nada twiggled her breath through the straw at the bottom to get the last drops. Then a machine in the corner played "Walkin' My Baby Back Home" at Nada's request. It was a song the baker used to sing to her when she collected the bread. If the nurse wasn't looking, he would take Nada to the small room off the room where the ovens were, and putting his cigarette down, probably on the buns, only that didn't matter, he would kiss her and squeeze her and croon in her ear, "Walkin' my baby back home." Nada felt lonely, hearing the song coming loud and wild out of the machine. The baker had promised her a ring with 7 diamonds, and a necklace with 30 if she married him. But Lofty the pig boy was taller, like the man in the serial, Margella Lucia's beloved, and you had to decide sometime. "No, I don't like that song," Nada said when "Walkin' My Baby Back Home" had finished. She puckered her face. "That song brings memories," she said. The nurse was sympathetic. She had never heard Nada speak of her home or of her mother or father and sisters and brothers, none of whom ever came to visit. "What memories, Nada? Does it remind you of your mother and father, of being at home?" Nada looked at her seriously. "No," she said. "Silly. It's memories of love." So they walked up and down the streets, eating ice creams and looking in shop windows at the frozen ladies with dolly pillow breasts and long pink legs, being dressed by smart men with flat black hair and striped suits. They watched a toy engine moving clickety-clack around and around, being waved on by a man with a green flag instead of a hand, a tall man riding nowhere on a bicycle. And best of all, in the window of the hardware store, 4 puppet men who were laying bricks to build something, a house or a church or a bathing shed or a place where airplanes were left to sleep. The first man jerked forward with a brick, and the second man took it from him, leaving the first man in an anguished pose, with his hands praying in the air. And it was the same with the third man until the brick reached the fourth, where you would have thought something peaceful would happen, but oh no. Just as the fourth puppet prepared to lay the foundation, some electric device came into play whereby the brick was sneaked back to the first man, who jerked himself to life once more, and the building began again. Nada was fascinated. Except, she said, "It doesn't build." Nurse looked at her watch. It was time for the interview. "We have to go, Nada. Once more, to watch it being built. But the same thing happens. It won't end unless the electricity breaks down or the battery runs out. They'll be there forever, doing the same thing in the same place." The nurse waited outside. Nada sat in the room and faced the 3 men. Nada liked the tall, dark one immediately because he smiled at her first and offered her a cigarette. She took it, her fingers trembling. For the time had come that she had awaited and talked of for years and marked on the calendar. It seemed incredible that perhaps next week she would be sitting in a luxury hotel in Hollywood or Mexico City. She and the pig boy would have to decide quite soon so they could book tickets on the plane, eating sponge cake with 4 layers and drinking dry martinis. Nada smiled, sighed with bliss and impatience. The short, sandy-haired man leaned forward. "Well," he said, "what's the sigh for, my dear?" Nada looked at him derisively. Not much of a man there, she thought. He's going bald and he's got no eyebrows. I'll stick to the tall, dark one. "I was thinking," she said. "Only thinking." "And what exactly were you thinking about, eh?" the other man, who was quite fat, with a looped mustache, inquired. Not much of a man there either, Nada thought, surveying him. "I'm right in sticking with the tall, dark one." "Eh?" the man with the mustache persisted. "Mind your own business. MYOB, Nada said abruptly. "I should think so," the dark man said, smiling kindly. "We haven't even introduced ourselves, have we? Now, we're 3 men who want to have a little chat with you and see how happy you are and what we can do for you." That's fair, Nada thought. "This is Mr. Burke and Dr. Pillay, and I'm Dr. Craig. And your name is?" He hesitated. Nada was sure he knew her name, but seeing as he was the nicest and the handsomest, she smiled her special smile at him, and tucking her ring out of sight under her sleeve, she said, "I'm Nada." "And how old are you, Nada?" Nada was sure he knew this too, but she liked to oblige. "I'm 21 today," she said. "And do you know what being 21 means?" the sandy-haired man, Mr. Burke, asked. "Who doesn't? I can get married. I'm free." "And if you were free, Nada, what else would you do besides get married?" Nada was carried away with excitement. It was no use. In spite of being attracted to the tall, dark Dr. Craig and feeling that perhaps she and he could be friends quite soon, she could not keep her hand covered any longer. She showed the ring. "My engagement ring. Sapphires and 1 diamond. I'm getting married next week and going by plane to Mexico City or to Hollywood. It isn't decided yet." The dark man frowned. Nada noticed this and thought, "He's jealous. I can tell." Feeling sorry for him, she smiled her special smile again. He looked up from his papers. "So it's all arranged?" he said slowly, and Nada detected the sadness and regret in his voice, but she knew it couldn't be helped. You couldn't shilly-shally all your life. You had to decide sometime. Even if the ring she was wearing did have fewer diamonds than the baker had promised, and perhaps fewer than the tall, dark man with his fat salary should have provided, yes, you had to make up your mind. "Wouldn't you like to go home, Nada?" the man with the mustache asked. Nada did not speak. Her lips trembled. She looked for comfort to the dark man, who smiled quickly, giving her all of the smile from the beginning to the end, and then what was left over in the eyes. The sandy-haired man, trying to put in his spoke in and win favor, split his face into a smile as well. "Happy birthday," he said triumphantly, and the others joined in with a murmur of "Happy birthday." "You're not very big for your age, are you, Nada?" It was the sandy-haired man again. "How will you manage in the world?" Nada looked defiant. "I'm a bastard," she said. "My mother thought me into being small. That's why I didn't grow, and I've got yellow skin instead of pink. But I'll manage all right, you'll see." Her lips quivered. The tall man offered her another cigarette and leaned forward with a match for her so that their faces were quite close together, and she smelled his shaving cream and tobacco smell. "Now we're going to ask you a few more questions, Nada," he almost whispered, looking into her eyes. Her heart tumbled over and over. "Your name is Nada, isn't it?" he said. "I told you it was," Nada said patiently. "Well now, I seem to have forgotten the date. Perhaps you could tell me." Nada told him, reminding him that it was also her birthday. Of course, of course. "And this place here where we're having our little chat, what's the name of this place?" "It's to do with hospitals. I can tell by the smell," Nada said. He smiled once more. Then the man with the mustache pounced. "What are 7 3s?" he said. Nada looked at him in amazement, then she faltered, looking down at her sapphire ring. "I don't know about those things. I'm not specially educated." "You read the newspapers?" "I can't read so well. I like the pictures." "And what did you say you would do if you were free?" "I am free. I'm 21 and getting married and going next week to Mexico City or Hollywood by plane." She was saying it now like a charm, for she felt suddenly afraid and uncertain, as if it wouldn't happen, as if she'd just go back to the hospital and nothing would be any different. That couldn't be it. She was 21. Next week she would be free. She felt for the key on her breast and touched its hard glitter. "It's wrong to steal, isn't it?" the sandy-haired man said, sidling up to her. "I never stole it. It's for my birthday. It's the key." "Of course you didn't steal it, Nada. We're just talking to you. Why do you think that it's wrong to steal?" Nada screwed up her face. "Because," she said. "Quite right," Dark Man said. "Quite right. And what are you going to do when you're married?" Again, she could feel the regret in his voice, but she knew he had to face things, so she told him. "Have babies and give cocktail parties on the terrace?" The men exchanged glances, and Dr. Craig wrote something down carefully on a sheet of paper. He held out his hand. "Goodbye," he said. Their hands touched and clasped. Nada trembled. The 2 other men also shook hands with her and said goodbye, and the nurse came in, summoned by a little brass bell on the desk to take Nada and the sheet of paper away. When they were standing in the waiting room, Nada burst into tears, her thin, huddled shoulders moving with the pattern of her sobbing. Her tears fell on the bluestone ring, blurring it so that she could not see her face with the world in it anymore, and it was secret like the pearl. She did not know why she was crying. It was just that she had been asked the questions in a pouncing way, and that nothing seemed neat and planned anymore as it had been. It was all muddled and unclear, with nothing sparkling and shining. The nurse waited. "We're going back now," she said. "Here, put on some lipstick. You're 21, remember? You're not acting 21, crying like that." Nada smiled, taking hold of the one thing that mattered. "Yes, I'm 21, and after we've gone back past the hills and the gorse and I pack my things and get my trousseau ready, I'll be free." Nada rushed into the day room to retrieve Margella Lucia from the care of the nun Mary, all in black, who was sitting in the corner praying and telling her beads. "Has she been good?" Nada asked, waking the doll with a kiss so that its blue eyes popped open, flirting with the nothingness in front of them. Then, with the doll kissed and clutched in her arms, Nada sat down, preparing to tell the awed and envious patients about her wonderful journey into town and how she would be free next week because she was 21. In the ward office, the nurse handed to the sister the paper that the three men had signed. The wording on the paper began, "Registered under the Mental Defectives Act, 1928. This is to certify that Nada Wilma Tate, age 21, ... and so on. The same thing over and over. Brick puppetry. And Gorse is not people." So thank you so much for listening to this special episode. I'll be back next week with a biography of Janet Frame and more information about her really fascinating life. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to check out the Beacons page and Patreon page. Be sure to like, review, and subscribe wherever you're listening, but especially on Apple Podcasts. And be sure to remember, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. Until next time. Thank you so much for listening to Behind the Walls of the World Psychiatric Hospitals. Once again, I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Gallup. Cover image is by Christopher Payne. Check out my website at behindthewallspodcast.buzzsprout.com. Follow the podcast and learn more on Facebook at Behind the Walls Podcast and Instagram at Behind the Walls Pod. For questions or recommendations, email me at behindthewallspodcast@gmail.com. You can find new episodes every Monday on Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you're listening right now. If you like the show, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find and listen to the show, and I would be so grateful. Please stay tuned for more episodes of Behind the Walls of the World Psychiatric Hospitals. Until next time.